What is the greatest battle in history? Is it the Battle of Waterloo? No. Is it the Battle of the Bulge, or at Midway in World War II? No. It's not even the battle at Marathon or at Salamis. The greatest battle of the ages is an intellectual battle, a war of ideas. And the great generals opposing each other in this war are Plato and Aristotle. Last time we looked at the birth of philosophy and scientific inquiry as inaugurated by Thales. We saw how the early attempts of the pre-Socratics to answer the question of metaphysics eventually collapsed into the skepticism of the Sophists, and how Socrates' discovery of epistemology opened a new pathway, which would enable the next generation of philosophers to develop whole comprehensive systems of philosophy. Today we will take a look at these philosophic systems. Now, to begin with, I want to delimit my assignment. My goal for today is not a detailed presentation of Plato's and Aristotle's philosophy, which would take several hours at least. Instead, I want to give you a basic outline that illustrates the fundamental differences between the two, in their method and their approach. As a way of motivating you, let me say that understanding the essentials of Plato's and Aristotle's diametrically opposed philosophies is by far the most important takeaway philosophy has to offer. It has been said that every man at his core is either a Platonist or an Aristotelian, and the development of history since their time can be explained by whose ideas have been more dominant in any given age. So if you want to help upset the ongoing decline of Western civilization, then there is no more important tool you could have than understanding this great battle of the ages between Plato and Aristotle. Okay, let's get started. First up is Plato. Plato's philosophy is an ingenious combination of several wrong answers provided by the pre-Socratics that we've looked at last time. In metaphysics, he combines Heraclitus' view that everything is change with Parmenides, who had said that everything is ultimately one. He does so by splitting the universe into two worlds: the world of the senses, in which we live and where everything changes, and a world of abstract ideas, in which everything is ultimately one. The changing world of the senses Plato regards as inherently imperfect, a view which you should already be familiar with if you watched the first episode. The world of abstract thought, on the other hand, Plato regards as true reality, because it does not contain these messy, particular things which change, but abstract ideas that are eternal and unchanging. Now, in order to make Plato's metaphysics fully intelligible, we need to take a look at his epistemology and his view on the nature of concepts. What Plato does in epistemology is not treat concepts as a mental capacity to organize perceptual information, the way I presented this issue last time. Instead, he regards concepts as real things, real entities which actually exist. Of course, they don't exist in this low physical sensory world in which we live, but in a higher, a true form of reality, a world of ideas, of concepts. This world of ideas is commonly referred to as Plato's world of forms. The world of forms, according to Plato, is true reality, while the sensory world in which we live is only a poor reflection of the world of forms. Why does Plato regard the world of forms as superior? Again, because things in this world change, while in the world of forms everything is eternal. The tree in your garden might be cut down, it might grow, shed its leaves, or wither and die, but the concept tree is immutable. Thus, argues Plato, the real truth about trees cannot be derived from observing these messy and constantly changing trees in the physical world, but by contemplating the eternal concept of tree, or treeness, in the world of forms. If we were now to ask Plato the question, how do I know? He would say, the way to acquire knowledge, true knowledge, is by accessing this higher world of forms. And how do I do that? Plato's answer? The only way to do it is by engaging in a lifelong exercise in more and more abstract thought, until you lose all sight of and interest in the sensory, physical world. Here is where Plato incorporates the Pythagorean number fixation, because he regarded the pursuit of higher mathematics as the best way to get lost in abstract thought. But how, you may wonder, do we know we have succeeded in our pursuit of abstract thought? What is the end game of such a life of otherworldly contemplation that Plato recommends? Plato says you will know you have reached your goal when you grasp the highest, most abstract of all concepts in the world of forms. The one concept that subsumes all other concepts, and that when fully understood will grant you omniscience. This highest concept Plato described as the form of the good, or the idea of good. And it is his way of incorporating Parmenides' idea that everything is ultimately one. With this background information about Plato's epistemology, we can go back to his metaphysics and ask Plato, what is it? Answer, everything is form. Which ultimately means the form of the good, because the form of the good subsumes all the other forms, whose imperfect reflections give rise to the things we encounter in the sensory world in which we live. Here I want to read once more this quote from the Republic, because it is such a great condensation of Plato's metaphysics and epistemology. Quote, "In the world of knowledge, the idea of good appears last of all, and is seen only with an effort, and, when seen, is also inferred to be the universal author of all things beautiful and right, parent of light and of the Lord of light in this visible world, and the immediate source of reason and truth in the intellectual. You must not wonder that those who attain this beatific vision are unwilling to descend to human affairs, for their souls are ever hastening into the upper world where they desire to dwell." Unquote. Not surprisingly, Plato says he is unable to describe in more detail what the form of the good is actually like. All he says is that if you come in contact with it, you will just know. And so Plato's philosophy emerges as a form of mysticism, technical mysticism. To those who understand, no explanation is necessary. To those who don't understand, no explanation is possible. In either case, he doesn't explain. As a consequence, Plato's whole complex chain of abstract reasoning led him further and further away from the distinctively Greek primacy of existence outlook as inaugurated by Thales. And his philosophy ended up regressing to a position much closer to the primacy of consciousness mysticism that had dominated men's thinking during the countless millennia prior to Thales. If you've ever wondered how people in a technologically advanced society like our own can hold the most bizarre ideas, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, it is above all the technical mysticism of Plato, which provides the intellectual framework that enables them to do so. Indeed, I would argue the greatest curse on the history of Western civilization is the widespread acceptance of Plato's view that knowledge can be obtained by accessing a mystical world of forms and by bypassing the sensory, i.e. the real world, entirely. And if you don't see this point, I invite you to take a look at some of the ethical and political conclusions Plato derived from his metaphysics and epistemology. The central ethical tenet of Plato I have already alluded to. If you ask Plato, "What should I do?" he would describe the ideal life as one of resisting the inclinations of the body and the senses, in order to immerse oneself in an ascetic life of abstract contemplation and the study of higher mathematics. Your final goal is to reach the form of the good, and your reward will be the omniscience that comes from contemplating an immutable principle. However, when Plato observed the people around him, he noticed that they do not act in the way his philosophy says they should act. They don't just sit around, lost in a world of deep thoughts, in order to pursue a mystical quest to reach a higher world of beauty, truth, and sunlight. On the contrary, most people are preoccupied with the pursuit of worldly things, such as food, wealth, property, money, sex, etc. Consequently, Plato developed an extremely low opinion of people, who he thought were wasting their time with all these sensory, worldly distractions, and were doomed to remain ignorant of any true knowledge, which can only be obtained by contemplating the world of forms. His own experience had taught Plato that most people cannot be persuaded to abandon their way of living in favor of his ideal life of abstract contemplation. And so the conclusion to him became obvious. They have to be compelled. Which brings us to Plato's Politics. If we want to form an ideal society, says Plato, we have to put men in charge who are experts at contemplating the world of forms. These philosophers must be given absolute power, so they may organize society in accordance with the true knowledge only they are able to obtain. This view of politics is known as Plato's theory of the philosopher kings, which has dominated Western politics almost entirely with very few exceptions. Every form of dictatorship and government control has taken its inspiration, support, and basic justification from this view of Plato, including the Roman emperors, the medieval theocrats, the absolute monarchs, the fascists, the socialists, communists, Nazis, and welfare statists. And no matter how many people are sacrificed on the altar of otherworldly Platonic ideals, no matter how often and how disastrous such systems collapse, they keep coming back and will never go away, as long as the basic premises of Plato's philosophy continue to be widely upheld and idealized. So let's take a moment to consider the extent of Plato's influence on our own way of thinking. Have you ever accepted or employed one of the following notions? It's good in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. Nobody is perfect. People are stupid, with the optional addendum, except for me. It is so good, it must be out of this world. The pursuit of money or sex is vulgar and materialistic. What can you do when you deal with people? Knowledge is its own reward. We need to do what is good for people, even if they don't see it. It is too good for this world. It is so bad, but it is only human. All of these notions, and countless similar ones, are ultimately derived from Plato. Over the past 2,500 years, many of them have become so pervasive and institutionalized in our culture that most people have come to accept them as simply self-evident. And it is a hopeless task to try and refute any one of them without challenging their underlying philosophy. Which brings me to the second great philosophic system builder. The man who brought reality, knowledge, morality, and perfection back to this earth. His name is Aristotle. As a young man, Aristotle left home and made his way to Athens to join Plato's school, the Academy, where he studied under Plato for some 20 years. As far as we can tell, he spent most of this time as a devoted Platonist. In fact, he was widely praised as Plato's top student. But over the years, Aristotle began to question the Platonic thinking methods of his master. He came to see the futility of trying to explain this world by reference to some other radically different world. No abstract contemplation of Platonic forms ever yielded any real information about the actually existing entities they were supposed to explain. Take an oak tree, for example. What is the nature of an oak? Does it need water or sunlight to grow? If so, how much? What kind of soil can it grow in? How tall can an oak tree grow? Etc., etc. To all of these questions, Plato's philosophy provides no sensible answer. Plato might argue that in the world of forms, the form of oak tree is somehow connected with the forms of acorn, water, sunlight, soil, and height. But as Aristotle pointed out, such an explanation doesn't add anything to our understanding of the actually existing oak tree in the schoolyard of the Academy. And in fact, it wasn't our abstract contemplation of the idea of oak which enabled us to know that an oak needs water, sunlight, and a suitable soil. Instead, it was our sensory observations of actually existing oak trees which allowed us to learn the defining characteristics of what makes an oak. Therefore, Aristotle concluded that in order to understand the nature of oaks, we need to study real existing oak trees in this world, not just contemplate whatever idea of oak we already happen to have in our heads. After Plato's death, Aristotle continued to pursue this line of reasoning. His general frustration with the Platonic approach led Aristotle to undertake a year-long voyage around the Aegean Sea in order to pursue a systematic study of living entities. He began analyzing and dissecting every form of bird, mammal, fish, shellfish, insect, and plant he could get his hands on. He then proceeded to systematically categorize living entities based on their common characteristics. In doing so, he not only became the world's first biologist, but it also helped him to fully grasp that it is particular entities that exist, and that we derive concepts from existing entities. Quote from Aristotle: "Let us first understand the facts, and then we may seek the cause." On the basis of this realization, Aristotle proceeded to construct a philosophic system which in all essentials was diametrically opposed to Plato's, and which turned him into history's greatest champion of the primacy of existence. While Plato held concepts or forms as the true unit of reality, with particular entities as their imperfect reflections or derivatives, Aristotle held existing objects, particular things, to be real, and concepts as simply our way of categorizing them. So you see, the presentation of the nature of concepts that I gave you last time when discussing Socrates was in fact Aristotle's. Socrates didn't really know anything about the nature of concepts. He merely grasped their crucial importance for understanding human knowledge. It is only Plato and Aristotle who then proceeded to provide actual explanations for the nature of concepts. Now, to make Aristotle stand out in even bolder relief, I would like to contrast him not only with Plato, but also with the Sophists. The Sophists say that everything is subjective. There is no objective reality for men to know or refer to. Man is the measure of all things. What's true for you isn't true for me. Each man, in effect, creates his own world, and you merely need to consult your feelings and whims for any so-called knowledge to automatically write itself upon you. Then comes Plato, who strongly disagrees with the Sophists. Objective knowledge is possible, he says, but it cannot be acquired by referring to this natural world, rather by gaining access to another supernatural world. Once you gain access to this other world, you merely need to consult it for true knowledge to automatically write itself upon you. And then comes Aristotle, who says there is not no reality a la the Sophists, and there is not two realities a la Plato. No, there is only one reality, this reality, and we can acquire objective knowledge of it in two basic ways. We can know things in particular using the evidence of the senses, and we can know things in general by using knowledge of particulars, i.e. percepts, in order to form concepts. However, conceptual knowledge does not automatically write itself upon us in the way perceptual knowledge virtually does. To acquire perceptual knowledge of reality, you merely need to open your eyes and look at something. But to acquire conceptual knowledge of reality, it is not sufficient to be merely conscious and awake. We can't simply think in any way we feel like. That would be the dead-end approach of the Sophists. Nor can we detach our thinking from reality and the evidence of the senses, the way that Plato does. To form valid concepts, we need to think using a specific method. A method based on this reality, the only reality there is. A method which identifies and integrates the evidence of the senses without contradicting them. Quote, "More dependence must be placed on facts than on reasonings, which must agree with facts." Unquote. And this method of reasoning that agrees with facts, Aristotle called the organon, which means the instrument. Today we call it logic. If you want to understand what in modern times made possible the scientific revolution and the age of reason and enlightenment, it is above all the rediscovery of Aristotle and his method of non-contradictory identification of facts and reasoning on its basis. Francis Bacon captured the essence of it most eloquently in his famous aphorism, "Nature to be commanded must be obeyed." So there is no use in following the Sophists' advice and just do whatever you feel like and then start throwing temper tantrums when nature doesn't comply with your whims. Nor is there any use of somehow trying to get around nature, like Plato does. No, more dependence must be placed on facts than on reasonings, which must agree with facts. Nature to be commanded must be obeyed. His discovery of the nature and laws of logic is the crown jewel in Aristotle's long list of achievements. As the father of logic, he not only defined it for the first time, but also described in great detail how logic operates, the necessity of first principles or axioms, what logical fallacies there are, and much more. Aristotle's work on this topic I regard as the greatest intellectual achievement in history, because he provided all of his posterity not simply with his own answers as to what to think, but with a self-correcting method of how to think. So now that we have surveyed some of the high points of Aristotle's metaphysics and epistemology, we can ask him, what is it? Answer, everything is something. Something particular. A planet, a tree, a man. And how do I know? Quote, Truth is a remarkable thing. We cannot miss knowing some of it, but we cannot know it entirely." Unquote. By that he means that knowing does not consist of knowing nothing, a la the Sophists, and it does not consist of knowing everything, a la Plato's form of the good. No, to know is to know something. Something in particular via the senses, i.e. percepts, or something in general by using the method of logic to form concepts based on percepts. There are a lot more things to say about Aristotle's metaphysics and epistemology. A lot of good things and a lot of not so good things. However, for today's purposes, I'm gonna pass all of that by. Whatever Aristotle's errors, he inaugurated an approach to philosophy unsurpassed in intellectual honesty and objectivity. And he discovered a method of thinking that would enable us as his descendants to correct his errors and the errors of Plato, the Sophists, the Pre-Socratics, and every other thinking being that came before or after. Now let me turn to a few words on Aristotle's ethics and politics. As we have seen, Aristotle rejects Plato's way of degrading the natural world in favor of a supernatural world of forms. Consequently, he does not hold the ideal life as one of otherworldly contemplation. And since he doesn't dismiss the senses as a distraction, he does not condemn the pursuit of worldly pleasures either. Because there is only one reality, and because each thing is what it should act in accordance with what it is, in accordance with its nature. Quote, "Everything that depends on the action of nature is by nature as good as it can be." Unquote. While the acorn is trying to become an oak, and the tadpole is trying to grow into a frog, an infant should try to achieve his potential of becoming a man. Which brings up the question, what is a man? Man, according to Aristotle, is the rational animal. And what should I do as a rational animal? Says Aristotle, you should pursue a life of reason. Which does not mean doing whatever you feel like, a la the Sophists, nor to pursue thinking as an end in itself, a la Plato, but rather to think in accordance with reality and then act in accordance with your thinking. You should live, not just to survive, but to thrive. Now all of these ethical tenets directly result from Aristotle's metaphysics and his refusal to surrender life on earth to the Sophists as something unknowable or to Plato as something not worth having. Quote, "Nature flies from the infinite, for the infinite is imperfect, and nature always seeks an end." Unquote. What then is the end for a man to seek? What should he be after? Happiness. You should pursue happiness, your happiness, and if you achieve it, you should be proud. Quote, "Now the man is thought to be proud who thinks himself worthy of great things, being worthy of them. For he who does so beyond his deserts is a fool, but no virtuous man is foolish. Since the proud man deserves most, he must be good in the highest degree, for the better man always deserves more, and the best man most. Therefore the truly proud man must be good, and greatness in every virtue would seem to be characteristic of a proud man. And it would be most unbecoming for a proud man to fly from danger, swinging his arms by his sides, or to wrong another. If we consider him point by point, we shall see the utter absurdity of a proud man who is not good. Nor again would he be worthy of honor if he were bad. For honor is the prize of virtue, and it is to the good that it is rendered. Pride then seems to be a sort of crown of the virtues, for it makes them greater and is not found without them. Therefore it is hard to be truly proud, for it is impossible without nobility and goodness of character. Such then is the proud man. The man who falls short of him is unduly humble. In his Politics, Aristotle generally advocates a government of laws, not of men. Quote, "Order is law, and it is more proper that law should govern than any one of the citizens. Upon the same principle, if it is advantageous to place the supreme power in some particular persons, they should be appointed to be only guardians and the servants of the laws." Unquote. Thus, Aristotle opposes the Sophist ideal of surrounding yourself with a group of thugs to take over the government so that you may then become a tyrant and follow your whims. Such a life Aristotle regards as a way of guaranteed vice and misery. Nor does Aristotle believe men should be ruled by Platonic philosopher kings. Since each man is in contact with reality via means of the senses and has the capacity to think for himself, he must be left free to pursue his life in accordance with his own best judgment. This concludes my presentation of Aristotle's philosophy. In the spirit of full disclosure, let me also say that my presentation of Aristotle has been highly selective and very sympathetic. In the remnants of Aristotle's writings that have come down to us, there are many passages where he contradicts several of his own distinctive ideas, and he is not fully consistent. However, I believe these errors and inconsistencies can be justly put aside as unavoidable carryovers from 20 years of Platonic schooling, and a world in which politics commonly reduces to the sophist principle that might makes right. That is why I have limited my presentation to what is distinctively Aristotle's and original with him. Alright, we've now completed this lightning-like survey of the two great philosophic systems. My thanks and compliments to all of you for sticking around up to this point. Next time I'm going to wrap up ancient philosophy and also give you a couple of movie recommendations that might help you to digest some of this material. So until then, thank you for your kind attention.